Hello everyone, and thank you for coming back to yet another episode of The Glowing Paradigm. I am your host, Peter, aka LPD8 Dubuque, and this week, it's going to be a very interesting week because if you're watching this on YouTube, you're seeing the video portion finally be added. Now, of course, I'm going to sit here, and I've been trying to figure out how to do this with the video editing software, but you know what? If it's slightly off in terms of the audio sync up thing with my face, then it's slightly off. I've just been trying really hard with it. I'm going to be working on trying to get a webcam so that before we can get rid of that whole latency issue, but there's not much I can do at this point right now, so we're just going to deal with it. Now, I'm sure you're also asking me why am I wearing sunglasses. It's because I don't want you guys seeing this with my eyes constantly, because it's one of those things I feel rather embarrassed about. So therefore you guys don't need to watch that. The other thing is you're probably wondering, why am I wearing my blackout gloves? It's just so you guys can see what I'm doing when I actually do my little finger waving things as I do my talk, so you guys can see what I'm talking about. Cool. So, we have talked about the grid. We have now gave you guys a pretty good idea of what you need to understand. If you still need some help, IKTeddy's video that he did with Amazing Lights, Gloving 101, will be linked in the description below. Please go check that out if you need a basic understanding. But to get right into the things I want to talk about is that you are showing a point in a space and you're showing whether you can move this point throughout the space, move around this point in the space, or move through this point within the space. What are the concepts that people think about when it comes to the grid? Well, the most obvious one that you're probably sitting there thinking of is tutting. Tutting is pretty much the most obvious one. It's very simple because it just moves like it's on a grid, and it does a lot of things on the grid. That's really interesting, right? Yes, it does. That's probably the most obvious. But the funny thing is, liquid also works on the grid too. Because if you're watching this on my YouTube portion, you can see me doing these finger rolls, and there's a fixated point in between my wrists that you are seeing. That's a point on the grid.
Nice.
Ooh. Yeah, I know this is going to be rather awkward, disjointed, jarring, all that stuff when it comes to the video portion, because I have no freaking clue what I'm supposed to be doing on this part. But that's okay. That's what we're here for. It's what we're learning. So, what are the methods in defining and learning the technique? We are going to define the technique by its movements. So first things first, I wanted to address the directional movements, the directional dynamics that we have when it comes to the grid, which, if you're not using mathematical terms, you got vertical, horizontal, and lateral, which is up and down for vertical, left and right for horizontal, and lateral is front and back. Don't know why you guys are fighting me on this stuff. This is what we're going to be using. So, you have those directions. How do we go about with these directions? What do we do with these directions? Well, there's so many things we can do. First things first is that we have things like translations, which, if you don't know what a translation is, it's basically you're sliding. You're literally just sliding your shapes. Okay, you're not sliding a point, you're sliding the shapes that you're creating. So even this is considered a translation. This is considered a translation. That's considered a translation. Translation.
Whoa, 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 whoa.
This, however, I will certainly tell you, is not a translation. This is known as a rotation. Oh, yes, this is considered a rotation. That's considered a rotation. This is considered a rotation. That's considered a rotation. You have various ways to rotate. Again, as long as you guys are keeping in mind your 3 directional points that you can work with, we can get through this. So, with that being said, you also have one other way to move about besides just moving about, is a form called folding. And what folding is basically what the name implies. You're literally just doing folds that allow you to show the point being in one spot. As you can probably see what I'm doing. Okay. You're allowed to show a point whether you're moving around the point, moving through the point, or moving the point about. Whatever the case may be. You have, again, various math terms that you can use. If you are trying to figure out other concepts to use within the grid, just apply your mathematical terms to help facilitate what you're trying to do. That's basically what you just need. So you have a single point that you're going to be working with. How does one find a good point to work with? And how does one figure out a good way to know what their grid framing is? Well, Thank you to 30K for explaining this to me in a good way. But when it comes to framing your grid between you and your viewer, you want to kind of use a good reference point for your framing, such as your own body frame could be that framing that you need. So you can have that kind of framing that you can do. As you can see here, I am framing myself on the YouTube side of things. You see me framing my body with my arms and how that frames about. Get it? Okay, good. If you don't get it, I'm sorry. I edited the video portion to it. I don't know what else you want from me. But without that getting too complicated, let's just talk about being able to slide through a point or slide around a point, you know, things of that nature. You know, you have a single point that you can sit there and move. Now, you know, you can sit there and showcase that point, and then you can move that point if you want, or you can move through that point as long as you're showcasing that point. The other thing is that you can have a single point where all the other points are moving about, therefore showing and these rotations that are moving about a point, because these points, if you're watching on YouTube, my white tips are points where my wrists are touching and connecting is that third point. So you're showing where these other 2 points are rotating on. That is your negative point, if that makes any sense.
It's funny because it's true.
So it's like negative space that your viewers aren't really paying attention to, but once you identify it's there, then people will see it, kind of deal. Okay. The other thing is that when it comes to that, you can also use that point to rotate on itself and be able to move your folds as such. You know, you have those kind of ideas. So when it comes to multi-point grid work, basically you're kind of integrating more isolations, platforms, and animations into your craft and into your mechanics. And it's because you're showing 2 different points and you're showing how they are working within relation to each other. You know, they can move about at equal distance and they can rotate at equal distance. You know, whatever the case may be. It's one of the things I definitely want to stress, that when it comes to multi-point, you definitely got to showcase these points. Now, what does multi-point grid work actually do for you? Well, it really does help you identify your spatial awareness. Not only that, it is showing your level of spatial awareness at 2 different points at a time, if that makes any sense. Okay. Not only that, but this does allow for you to manipulate and show your understanding of depth perception to your viewer. Not only that, but you're able to manipulate your viewers. So as a way I'm going to showcase depth perception is that I'm going to do a circle with a finger, and I'm going to just keep doing this. But you see how it looks nice and big when it's all nice and up and close? And I pull it back, it's all nice and tiny. Then I bring it all the way forward again, it looks all nice and big.
The prophecy is true.
That's how you're going to be pretty much understanding your depth perception, is that you don't really have to do much of it, just your positioning within the grid gives you that sense of depth perception to work with. Okay. So definitely keep that in mind. One thing I definitely want to cover on here is clusters, because I know clusters is going to come up eventually. When it comes to clusters in the grid work, what clusters do is that it shows to your viewer your understanding of how you can plot out multiple points within the grid and show their relationships to each other within the grid. Wow! So I will say this right now, that I'm not really good at clusters. I am an old head. Clusters is a very new concept for me, so bear with me when I try to explain this, because my showcasing and demonstration with my hands is not going to look pretty, but allow me to do so. The thing about clusters that everybody really likes is that you can start at a single point. As you can see here, I am doing a 6 point, and all of them are close together. That is literally your 1 point. Now I'm going to break up this single point into 3. Now I'm going to break those 3 points into 6. And bring them back down to 3. And bring them back down to 1. That's your understanding of the grid work, is that you're showing these multiple points in relation to each other by the mechanics of what clusters show. Now, as with dials, it really shows you an isolation point and how you understand how to isolate a single point with another point moving around it, so on and so forth, right? That's what clusters is doing on a multi-point scale. So you're doing dials essentially, but now you're doing it with multiple parts that you have to keep in mind, right? Stuff like that. So with that being said, clusters is a very multi-point planar concept that you need to understand. Not only that, you need to understand how to get the proper spacing in between all of your points and making sure that you got nice equal spacing between all your points, because if you don't, it's going to look really sloppy, as you can probably see with my hands, because I'm not good at clusters, and I'm willing to admit that.
My emotions! My emotions!
So that's the other thing you also need to understand, is that when it comes to clusters, it shows a scaling effect of the grid. So allow me to elaborate. What I mean by a scaling effect is that when you look at large scale stuff, you gotta think of things like king tutting and flails, okay? It's a big swooping motions with big parts happening, right? That is a big scale. Then you move down to finger tutting, and you now made the scaling of your grid a lot smaller. Did you make the space smaller? No. Did you make your plotting points of your lines smaller? Yes. You're just changing the parameters of your grid in terms of its type grouping rather than this actual space itself. Does that make any sense? I really hope it does.
Football!
So that's the thing about clusters, is that it shows you how to scale. In my opinion, clusters really showcase the smallest scaling of the grid. And it's just because you're bringing it to such small points. You know what I mean? You're not doing these big swooping things like arm tutting and king tutting likes to do. You're literally plot pointing different points and then showing their relationships to each other. You know, that's, you see the idea?
Mm-hmm, I heard that. I wish I didn't hear that, but I just heard that.
Okay. But that's my idea when it comes to clusters. That is how I will explain clusters when it comes to the grid. It utilizes the grid to pretty much its extreme. It also goes into an inverse effect where it's showing you the small scaling of the grid and also showing you multiple points in relation to each other and a lot of other stuff. It's a very advanced concept that deserves its own episode, really. So moving on from there, I want to cover flow type concepts within the grid, because like I said earlier, everything uses the grid. Tutting uses the grid, platforms use the grids, animations, isolations, digiting, styles, clusters, liquid, whips, flails, all that stuff uses it, including flow. Flow type concepts does use the grid. Do you have to use the grid for your flow type concepts? No. Some people want you to because they want you to show this constant awareness of reference when it comes to your flow type concept and your tech type concept. Even though you guys know what I say when it comes to tech being technique and flow just being what it is, as in just a nice progression carrying you through the show, and it's not actually defined by the moves that you do.
Why would you say something so controversial yet so brave?
With that being said though, how does liquid integrate onto the grid? Well, it's simple. If you know anything about functions or parabolas, then that's how they apply to the grid. I really don't see how that can get any more or less confusing. Anyways, it's basically, you just need to understand is that it also works on the grid. Even when you're doing something like this kind of finger roll where it's just kind of coming back to where it's beginning and kind of repeating itself and still using the same grid points, you know, that same bottom line, which is this is the bottom line of the grid, and showing that curvature. Okay. When it comes to whips and flails, it's really simple. If you want to pinpoint a point with your whip, a good way for me is with your thumb. So you have your thumb pointing at your viewer, then you do your whip, and you just make sure you isolate your thumb during your whip, because that is the point you're trying to showcase, right? If that makes any sense. Alright, when it comes to flails, to me flails kind of works on the same inverse as when it comes to your king tutting, because since they basically keep the same hand positions and you can move them around, you know, it's basically using the same scaling effect as your king tutting. Okay. Again, your flow type concepts don't need to follow the grid, and they don't have to follow the grid, but Some people like it when you do. So if you're the type of person who really wants to be very technical and having those technical movements throughout the space, then you want to get your grid work down. But yes, I think that pretty much covers all for my episode today. Once again, I know the audio and the video might not be matching up just right, and I understand that, and it's just because I'm using my phone as a webcam and there's some latency issues. I've been trying to do some overlay stuff, it's not really working out for me, so I'm just going to work with this for right now until I get more experience with video editing and get this working properly. So we'll see how that goes. But if you have any questions that I did not cover in this episode, you do have the various social media outlets you can hit me up at. They're all going to be linked down below. You also have my email, which is muttonchopguy@gmail.com. Here's the hint, muttonchopguy. Get it? You can also find me on Reddit. I'm under the username muttonchopguy, as always. Again, you can hit me up on my Facebook. I have Instagram. YouTube is another great place you can hit me up at. And lastly but not least, I'm getting so tired of having to say this, but if you like the content that I create and you wish to help me make better content, maybe helping me get a good webcam so I don't have to use my phone as a camera to do all this stuff, we can do that too. That would be great. As low as $1 a month though will go a long ways to helping me get closer to my goal of $1,000 a month, where I can do this full time and I don't have to do a daytime job to supplement this. Even though I work overnight. Don't know where I was going with that. Anyways, once again, if you like the content I make, please do consider donating to me on Patreon. You have the various social media outlets that you can hit me up at down below. This has been a long day. I've been trying to figure this out, and you know what? With how things are right now, I'm just gonna roll with it. If my content looks crappy right now, it looks crappy right now, and it's only gonna get better from here, right? So once again, thank you guys for listening / watching my episode. I absolutely love you guys, but I am your host, Peter, aka LPDA, and I'll see you guys all next week.